Hi everyone, so this is our first video of Codivate for HTML forms and tables for the web development course. So today we're going to go over HTML forms, and forms are used to receive some sort of input from the user. For example, if you're taking a survey, you can ask for your name, grade, to choose your favorite color, or choose a color out of red, green, and blue, out of a set of options, or to choose your state out of a list of states, which would be like the drop-down menu. So there's tons of different types of questions you can ask, and that's what forms are used for. So first we're going to go over text input. So when you're inputting like a bunch of text into a series of questions. This includes text area, email, and password. So first let's start creating the form. The first element we need to create this form is the form tag. And within this tag, we can create additional code to actually make our form. Then we would use input type text to make a text box. So what do you think is going to be displayed in the browser? So the input type equals text would make something that looks like this. It would be a text box where you can type things in, even though it's not really going to process because we don't really have, we're not using any backend development to process that data. So since we added the type equals text attribute to input, a text box appeared. However, the user needs to know about some sort of label or prompt, else the user doesn't really know what to put in the field. So let's add some more code. So we added over here label for equals name and first name. And then we would end the label. So that would give you an actual display because we need to know what we're putting in the text box. So notice how when you click on first name, it automatically puts you in the text box. And let's see why that happens. So we need to instruct our computer to associate the label of first name with the input text. And we do this by making the for and id attribute equal to the same string or the same name attribute. Since they have the same they have the same string literal, that means it's gonna kind of make that association between the label and input. Now that they're associated, we can click on the label and then we can start typing our response. And try to do the same thing for your last name. Input type email. What if the user wants to type in an email? So we can use type equals email, and so if we save and submit something that's not an email, it would throw an error. So that's something that's a little cool. And again, for input type password, to type in a password, we would just change it to password, and as you can see, it kind of changes it so you can't really see. So it's a bunch of dots, and you can't see the characters you're writing with. So you would use password if you're writing a password. What if the user wants to type in a whole paragraph? You can't really use input type equals text. We would have to use a lot more space. So we would use the text area tag to do this. So we would set the ID and forward to paragraphs to create that association, and we use a text area tag. So note that we don't need any type attribute because the text area already indicates that it's going to be a really big space for the user to write in. So now let's go over choosing from a set of options: radio, checkbox, and select, which is a drop-down menu. So first, select. You can use a drop-down menu. You can use a drop-down menu if there are a large number of options that the user can choose from. For example, if you wanted to know your favorite animals from a list of animals, you would use a drop-down menu. So, what is your favorite animal? There's a bunch of options here: dog, cat, panda, or squirrel. So that's an example of when you can use the select menu. Usually you would use it for longer lists. First, we would use a label tag to associate it with the drop-down. So we have the for and ID matching. Since the for and ID are the same, the label is associated with the selected menu. Then we would ask the actual question: what is your favorite animal? And that's what is being displayed to the user, the question. Everything inside of the select is kind of part of the drop-down. And so these are all the different options within. The value is kind of so if you're using JavaScript or any sort of backend development, this value is going to be sent to the server and therefore processed. The user information will be processed. So it's always good to have a value here. So input type radio. So you use radio inputs when you need to choose within a set of options and you can afford the screen space. And when you're making important decisions. For example, on a math test, you can be given 4 different multiple choice responses. So radio inputs are the same thing as multiple choice, and that's when you would use it. Like if you're making really important decisions or you're choosing within a small set of options and you can afford all the screen space. So just like text inputs, we can use the input tag and use type equals radio to make the radio buttons. But there's a problem. We only want the user to select one, right? It's a radio input. We only want one multiple choice answer. So we have to add a little bit more code than just type equals radio. So how can we change our code that we can only choose one at a time, just like a multiple choice question? So if we set the name value equal to the same string, that means we can only choose one because it's all associated with each other. Now we know that we can only choose one out of this set. So we have another problem. There's no label for the choices, and we need to create some labels here. So I know this seems a lot, but bear with me. So right now, it just looked like a bunch of like 3 dots, but we wanted to actually have a label or like some sort of display of what each answer is. So therefore, we would have to add a label. And again, it's the same thing. We have to associate our input with our label, so we would have to put for an ID to create that association. So I know there seems to be a lot of attributes for the input, but once you understand what each attribute is doing, it's not that difficult. And it's not that overwhelming. So we created each label next to the radio button, and the ID and for attribute are equals to the same value to associate the label with the input. So we need to create the radio buttons and labels for them, but we still need a question. So we can write some code so we can add the legend tag over here. So first, the field set element means that everything inside is associated with each other. Notice how it kind of creates a box around the question. And then we can write our question in the legend tag. So we would just use the legend tag to write a question, and that's kind of displayed here. So what if we need to send the information to a database or a server? So we need to add the value element so that the server can actually access the input data. So over here, we would add value equals color red. So this, whatever is equal to the value, that's going to be passed to the server, and it's going to be processed by through backend development. You don't really need to know all the backend, what happens in behind the screen for this course, but that's why we usually add our value attribute. So it doesn't really change the appearance of the text, but it just allows the server to access the data. So notice that nothing's really different. Checkboxes. So if the user needs to select more than one option, then use checkboxes. The process of making checkboxes is the exact same as radio inputs, but we set type equals to checkbox. So it's the same thing. You notice how you can choose multiple of them. So that's good. Input type equals submit. So finally, we need to learn about how to submit our forms. That calls for the submit button. So let's look at this line of code. Input type equals submit, value equals submit. So the value attribute is what is finally displayed to the user. So notice it's here. And while type equals submit, it makes it look like a submit button. And it also serves at that same function. When we get into JavaScript, you're going to use the submit button to submit your form. So, yeah. So here are some practice problems for you to do on your own time, and I would highly suggest you do them. They're good practice, and since we learned a lot about forms, I think it will be beneficial. HTML tables, and so that includes rows, columns, and headings. So we can use a table to display information in a more organized way than using rows and columns. Over here, we can have our item, quantity, price per item, for example, and then we have 2 items. So carrots and celery with their respective quantities and prices per item. So how about we create our table? So first we need our table tag to indicate the start and end of the table. So the T head tag would indicate the body or the header of our table, and the T body tag would be the body. So the T head tag would be what is displayed over here, while the T body would have everything below it, so all the different items. So the header section, let's work on our header section. So first we would use the TR element to create an actual table row. And inside of that row, we can use each TH element to make each category. So we would make item, quantity, and price. So that's what it would look like. So to make the items, so we can wrap each element in the TR or table row tag, and then each individual item in a TD or table data tag. So this would be a table row, and then each item would be in a table data. So that's what it would look like. And this would obviously be in the T body. So notice that carrots 3 and 3.0, even though they're kind of like in a column over here, when it's actually displayed, it's going to be displayed next to each other as part of the same row because they're in the same row tag. So great job, you created your table. So however, the input looks a little bit different from the tables we've seen. For example, there's no lines to separate the columns, right? That's because we haven't used any CSS yet, and we're going to definitely start with CSS next lesson. So how to make the borders show, how to make some more, like make the spacing a little bit more, things like that. That's going to help next lesson. So we're going to do some practice with tables. Definitely do them. They're super helpful. And if you understand the basics and fundamentals of HTML, that's really good because you can understand CSS and you wouldn't have to go back to your notes and look back and because you might have forgotten HTML. So this is really good. Definitely do the practice problems and explore more when you can. All right, so that's it for today's lesson, and I'll see you in the next one.